All right, we're moving along in our study of the life of Jesus. If you've been with us for a while, you know we've made fairly good progress. We're now sort of in the middle of Luke. It'll only be in the Gospel of Luke today. So if you'd like to find Luke 7, verse 36, we're going to start. We'll start there. While you're turning to Luke 7, verse 36, I should probably mention that according to the calendar, we are coming right up on the end of the school year, which typically means it is the end of our Bible study for the summer. I have us meeting for the rest of May, and depending on how things sort of where we land, maybe the first Sunday in June, or the first Thursday in June on the 6th. We'll kind of see where we break, if there's a logical stopping point there, because then there's camp seasons and vacations and all that sort of thing. So anyway, we've got today and at least 3 more before we take a break for the summer, and maybe 4. So just keep that in mind. All right. So the last time we were together, Jesus was dealing with the Pharisees and how they looked down on pretty much everybody who wasn't a Pharisee. Specifically, they were looking down on tax collectors and sinners. You know, why is Jesus hanging out with these kind of people? He must not know very much, because if he did, he wouldn't be palling with these folks. So we're really kind of still in that same theme here in Luke chapter 7. There is a woman who has an encounter with Jesus at a meal in a Pharisee's home. If you have been a part of the sermon series, we did the dinner with Jesus. We covered this passage, this experience back in February. Even though the account is sort of hinged on this woman's reaction to Jesus, the real heart of the passage turns out to be Jesus's authority and identity. That's really the center stage of the story. So let's start at Luke 7, verse 36. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he'd know who's touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner." Jesus answered him, "Simon, I have something to tell you." "Tell me, teacher," he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii, the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which one will love him more? Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. Jesus said, "You have judged correctly." Then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little." Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." All right. So, in sure and certain Bible study fashion, we'll kind of start at the beginning. So there is a Pharisee that we find out who is named Simon, and he has invited Jesus to come to his home for a meal. It is again, the Pharisees are the religious elite of Jesus' day. Most people had a very favorable perspective on the Pharisees. They were good community members. They were righteous. They followed the law. They paid their taxes on time. They kept their yards mowed. They took down their Christmas decorations when they were supposed to. Just fine, upstanding people. Everybody looked at them and said, "Hey, you're wonderful people. Thanks for doing what you do." Jesus had a different perspective on them because he could see through all of the fluffy, shiny veneer on the outside to see that everything that they did really, it was only external. There wasn't really any devotion in their hearts. There wasn't really any love for God. It was really love for the law and love for the praise and accolades that they got from the community. They were usually at odds with Jesus because he didn't care about any of the things that they cared about. Whatever they valued, Jesus had sort of a dim view of. What he thought was most important, they didn't care too much for. But that did not keep them from trying to engage with Jesus. I'm still not sure that I understand exactly like why this Pharisee Simon would decide that he should invite Jesus to come for dinner. Is he really interested in being a disciple of Jesus? Is he looking for some attention from Jesus? Does he believe that his stock in the community will go up because he's hanging out with the celebrity preacher of the day? I don't know. But it doesn't seem to matter. Simon invites him to his home for dinner, and even though Jesus and the Pharisees are usually at odds, Jesus accepts the invitation. That's probably one of the things, believe I've said this already in here a time or two. It's one of the surprising things as I'm going through this study of the life of Jesus, is how very often people who were opposed to Jesus and his ministry reached out to Jesus for a conversation or a discussion or a meal or something else. And rather than just avoiding them altogether, Jesus always engages with them. You know, he goes to the home of somebody who, if it was me, I probably wouldn't accept the invitation, but he does. He's not afraid to interact with people with whom he has major disagreements. There's probably a little lesson in that for us. We don't have to be emotionally connected to everybody. We don't have to love everybody that we spend time with, but we have to love everybody we spend time with. We don't have to want to go on vacation with them, but it's not a bad thing to engage with people who have a different perspective. I'm pretty sure that is not the point that Jesus is trying to make by going to this dinner, but it seems like it's a valid point for us. Now, so Jesus goes to this home of a law-abiding, highly respected Pharisee. And when he goes into the home, many of the things that he expects to occur because of where he lives and when he lives don't happen.
Why?
Why, you ask? Well, let me explain why.
Thank you.
The principles of hospitality in the Middle East then, and to some degree now, I mean, hospitality is very high up in importance and priority there. If you were inviting people into your home, you took care of their needs. So Jesus talks about a few things here that don't happen when he comes into this house. He mentions that he is not greeted with a kiss. There's not the passing of peace, the shalom greeting, welcome to my home. He mentions that there's no water provided for his feet. As you may fully be aware, there were not a lot of concrete sidewalks and paved roads for people to travel around on. They weren't in a car. They weren't even on horseback, mostly. They're walking every place, and most people are barefooted if they're not wearing sandals. It's dusty, it's dirty, it's muddy, and so you would offer to have people's feet washed when they came in. And apparently as well, there would be sort of maybe a little bit of conditioner as well. Jesus talks about, you didn't give me any oil for my head. Again, it's dry, it's dusty, it's bright and arid there, so kind of moisturize everything. That's some of the expectation when you went to somebody's home. This Pharisee didn't offer any of those typical services to Jesus, and probably not to anybody else who showed up either. So Simon is a Pharisee. He has invited Jesus and probably many others to this meal. There is somebody who shows up at the meal who is not necessarily on the guest list. She is a woman that the Bible says has lived a sinful life. In Greek, it means that she was preeminently sinful. She was especially wicked. So this is not just, Mrs. Kravitz or, somebody who kind of meddles or gossips or whatever. She's pretty hardcore. I don't know what all she's done, but the whole town knows who she is and the kind of lifestyle she is living. It is not God-pleasing. It is not law-abiding. But she has heard that Jesus is going to be at the home of this Pharisee for a meal. And so she crashes the party. It was typical when there was a big meal, a big banquet like this being thrown, that the poor who lived nearby, the outcasts, that they would come in sort of at the end for leftovers. We didn't eat all of the lamb, so you're welcome to whatever we've got. We have way too much rice, we have way too much bread, we have, nobody like this at all, but you're welcome to it. It's a way of taking care of the poor in the neighborhood, I suppose. And so she clearly is an outcast. She comes not necessarily for a doggy bag, but because Jesus is going to be there. And when she comes, she brings a small container of perfume. It says that it is an alabaster box. Alabaster is a stone, so it's carved. Usually alabaster is what color?
White.
Usually white. When I was looking around this week for a good picture of an alabaster box, apparently it comes in more than one color, but mostly white. There's pinks and oranges and some other things, some kind of greenish alabaster as well. But it's been carved and hollowed out, and it contains some kind of perfume, maybe like an essential oil or an ointment that's made out of probably myrrh, but maybe not. And as we've talked, at a meal for a big party like this, people are not sitting up at a table and a chair. They're not sitting upright. That's a very different deal. The tables are really low, like maybe 12 or 16 inches off the ground. There's cushions all the way around, and you lay on your left elbow and you eat with your right hand. Everybody is a shrimp cocktail, feet out behind you this way, kind of curled around the table. So Jesus is reclining at the table with this Pharisee and everybody else, and as he is laying there, this woman, sobbing, weeping loudly and visibly, comes up, sort of throws herself down at the feet of Jesus, and begins to cry all over his feet. There's enough tears that she's able to wash his feet with them. She's kissing his feet very tenderly. She is taking the alabaster jar contents and she's applying it to his feet. It is this very unashamed, very unabashed, blatant, passionate display of affection and worship. I hadn't really thought too much about it until we were just reading through it a second ago, but she's already weeping when she comes into the house. So it's pretty clear that she's having some sort of crisis, emotionally or spiritually. This is going to be a big deal. And she is really kind of deeply affected by the fact that she's going to get to see Jesus and to speak to him. That's a lot of tears. A lot of tears. Yes, Robert.
So you've got me trying to picture this in my head, but I get to the part where it says, standing behind him at his feet. Would you imagine he was standing up at that point? Because if his feet are in front of him, and she's behind him at his feet.
They're behind him.
Because I have this wheeled spinny chair, this is a lot easier.
That's true.
37 says he was reclining.
When I recline, my feet go out in front of me. That's why I'm trying to get this in my
Okay, so this is the triclinium. This is the table where they eat. And so you've got
artist and artist.
Okay, you've got people out like this all the way around. Okay, I'm going to assume that since Jesus has specifically been invited, that he's probably right here beside the host. Okay, and so this woman comes in behind where he is. I mean, he's facing this way. He's propped up on an elbow and he's reaching with this arm. So she comes in from behind, stands there for a moment until she's where she wants to be, and then kneels down. I mean, that's how it will be in my movie. She kneels down, covers his feet with her face, and her tears and her hair are all over his feet and ankles. Okay, when we think about reclining, we probably think more like, we're sitting in a nice big chair and our feet are kind of out.
I said, what happened to his other foot?
He's got it cocked over here over the arm, like me and my granddad. Okay. Okay, so I don't believe that that's taking real liberties with the text. It just kind of seems like that's based on everything that we know about sort of the banquet culture of their time. That's sort of the deal. So, here's the seat of honor. I'm gonna pick this
That makes sense.
this to eat.
Is there any history of how big the tables might have been?
No. I suppose it depends on how
They probably
big
use
your
the
house is
center
and how
for
many
serving.
people you're coming.
How rich you were?
Probably.
Any other comments about anything so far before we?
Do you think
Press on.
Jesus actually heard him mutter under his breath, or he just knew what he said?
I believe Jesus knows everything. There's probably a little bit of body language at least involved. Kind of the sneer. Now, in the other three Gospels, there are accounts very much like this one. I don't believe that they're the same one. For one, this account happens closer to the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and the other ones happen almost at the very end, right before the last week of Jesus' life. In Matthew 26, in Mark 14, and John 12, we find Jesus being anointed by a woman. But those three instances are tied to the village of Bethany. And Jesus says that what is being done in those instances is that the woman is preparing him for burial. In Bethany, it is the home of Simon the leper, which would be surprising that he would also be a Pharisee, but I guess it's possible. So that is similar in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but again, the other details are different. John tells us in John 12 that it is a woman named Mary from Bethany, who is the sister of Martha and Lazarus, that is doing the anointing of his feet. Matthew and Mark say that the anointing was on his head. Mark and John say that the perfume is a pint of pure nard. Nard is an ointment or an oil that's made from an exotic plant, which grows mostly in India. So this would have been a very spendy gift. It's imported from hundreds, if not thousands of miles away. So again, they're kind of similar. There's Jesus is at a banquet. He is reclining. Somebody comes who is very upset and washes his feet with her hair and tears. But I think that there's enough room for it to be two different experiences altogether. You can agree with me or not. Our salvation does not depend on how we feel about this. That's really okay. So, we've set the scene here. They're at the meal. Simon is probably feeling pretty good about things. Jesus is there beside him. And then this woman comes in and just is out of control, sobbing, weeping. There's this very surprising display. But one of the other things that's surprising, at least to Simon the Pharisee, is that Jesus doesn't go, "Ew, what are you doing? Who are you and why are you touching my feet?" He doesn't recoil from the attention of this wild woman. That's probably good enough. And so Simon is sort of thinking in his head, he may be a really great teacher, but he isn't much of a prophet. Because if he was, he would know what kind of woman she was, and he would not let her touch him. He is not really sure if Jesus actually is a prophet because of how he's not responding as he should. But Jesus is definitely a prophet, and kind of like he said about John the Baptist in the previous passage, is a prophet, but a lot more than a prophet as well. The reality is that Jesus doesn't just know who the woman is, but he knows what she's guilty of, and he also knows Simon's inmost unvoiced thoughts as well. Again, he may be picking up on some body language, but I believe that Jesus has the ability to know what we're thinking. It's not the only time we see him with what we might call ESP, some sort of special abilities to read people's minds and hearts. He clearly knows what Simon is thinking, and just out of the blue says, "Hey, Simon, let me tell you something." "All right, master, shoot. What you got?" And so Jesus begins to deliver the main course of the meal, which turns out to be this very important story. He says, "Simon, just imagine for a minute that there's a moneylender who has loaned money to two different people. To one, he has loaned almost a year and a half's wages. The other one has borrowed 7 weeks worth of wages. 500 denarii versus 50 denarii. A denarii is how much you, denarius, singular, is how much you make in the course of a day. It's your daily wage. So, almost a year and a half, 7 weeks. Nobody can pay anything. And Jesus says, the moneylender decides he's just going to write it off. Paid in full, don't worry about it. Jesus asks, which one of these two is going to love the moneylender more? The one who is forgiven a huge debt or the one who's forgiven a smaller debt? And what's Simon's answer? Duh. It's not in the text, but I'm pretty sure it was there. Duh. Obviously, it's the one who owed him way more money.
He supposes.
Yeah. I suppose, if you're going to make me answer out loud, I suppose it would be the one. Maybe he's expecting it to be a different answer. I don't know. And what's Jesus' response to Simon's summary? Bing, 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 on the nose. You got it, Simon. Nice job. You have answered correctly. That's exactly right. Bingo, dude. And then he brings the application of the story. Simon, you're the host of this great meal. It's a lovely banquet. And as host, you should have prepared to care for my needs. My feet should have been washed, but you didn't offer me any water. I should have been greeted with a kiss, but you didn't greet me. You didn't provide oil for my head. 3 strikes, dude. You're a bad host. But this lady that you're looking down on, this woman, this sinful woman, has done very personally for me what you didn't seem to think was important. She has not stopped washing my feet and kissing my feet since she arrived. She has anointed me again and again, not just with oil, but with expensive, extravagantly expensive perfume. That would be embarrassing, huh? To be called out right there in front of all of your guests.
I would be humiliated. I would want to crawl under a rock.
Well, you couldn't crawl under the table because it wouldn't have been tall enough, but I get where you're coming from.
And I'm pretty sure that was the intent too.
Yeah. Let's knock him off of his high horse here and show him and everybody else what really is the most important. It's not the banquet. It's not the invitation. It's not the spectacle of having this famous, admired celebrity in your home. The Pharisees' dedication to detail, their love for the law. They've totally missed the point.
What was the point?
I didn't give her any notes ahead of time.
She's on drugs.
I promise.
Jesus.
What is the point? The point is that the Pharisees should be looking at people with different eyes than they do. They should be seeing people with the eyes of Jesus, with the eyes of God, with eyes full of grace and mercy, and not eyes full of condemnation and prejudice.
Okay, thank you.
He is willing, he shows it really 2 ends of the spectrum. He's willing to associate with people that don't love him at all and think that he is a nuisance and at best and dangerous at most. But he is also willing to associate with everybody who is an outcast. All those people who've been run over, roughshod, and sort of pushed to the borders of society. Jesus is happy to associate with both of them. And that is the exact opposite of the Pharisees. The Pharisees want to hang out with other Pharisees, all the people they think are good enough, qualified enough, righteous enough, holy enough, devoted enough to be a part of the club. They don't want anything to do with ladies like this, tax collectors, the big sinners. And they would do just about anything to avoid contact with unwashed, unrepentant, preeminently wicked sinners like this woman of their day. Again, their perspective is, if Jesus had any idea what kind of lady she is, he would not let her touch him. But this woman is obviously deeply affected by the presence of Jesus. She has come. I mean, you wouldn't stop at the convenience store on the way to the banquet to pick up a bottle of the most expensive perfume available. I mean, this is something that wasn't just a, oh, I should take something. This is something that is definitely planned. It is premeditated. She is taking this extravagant gift to use in her love and affection for Jesus. It would seem to me that if she comes to find him with this kind of gift, with this sort of plan, it would seem like she clearly believes that Jesus is not just a good teacher. He is not just some sort of amazing prophet, that he has to be something special. The stories about Jesus are all over the place, from Galilee to Jerusalem and all of the parts north, south, west, and east. I mean, there's nobody who hasn't heard about him. So she comes to show him her love for him. Her love for Jesus is at least as big as her sinfulness. And Jesus tells her that her many sins are forgiven.
I always thought she was a street woman, but like a prostitute. But if she could afford,
Maybe that's why she could afford.
she had some,
Maybe
she
Have
has,
you
change your ways.
Have you seen Pretty Woman?
yes.
I don't know. Apparently she's extremely well known and apparently very good at whatever job she has because she's got money. Maybe it was a gift from,
An admirer.
yeah, sure, from a client,
Right.
a business associate. I don't know.
Okay.
She clearly believes that Jesus can do something special for her. It is not the gift of expensive perfume that brings her forgiveness. Some people might look at this story and go, oh, well, a bad application is, well, you should come to Jesus heartbroken and give him something valuable, and then he will forgive you.
No.
That is not what this story is trying to teach us. Actually, it's kind of the opposite. That it is her broken heart, it is her belief in Jesus, it is her humility, think about, you've got the Pharisee at one end of the table who is humiliated by Jesus, whether that was his intention or not, he should be. And then you've got this woman who comes already humiliated because of her actions in the community and her past. But she comes very humbly. She is leaning over this guy's feet that are dirty and dusty, and she's crying all over them. She's making foot mud with her tears. She's kissing his feet. She's wiping his feet with her hair. I mean, there is nothing proud about any of that.
The cost didn't matter to her. The cost of the perfume, the cost of her pride, none of that mattered.
The only thing that she can see in that room is somebody who is not rejecting her, somebody who is willing to engage with her. Just because she needs it, not because she can offer anything.
And she didn't ask to be forgiven.
True. She doesn't ask to be forgiven, but Jesus clearly says, to the surprise of everybody there, Pharisees and everybody else included, your sins are forgiven.
Which he had to know always riled everybody up.
Because that's happened already in the Gospel of Luke. You know, he has forgiven other sins, and everybody got all hot and bothered about it. Who does he think he is? And that's really sort of the underlying foundation of this story. She believes that Jesus is something very different and very special. The Pharisees sort of believe there's something different about him, but Jesus shows here that he has special knowledge, special insight, and he also has the ability and the power to forgive sins. The Pharisees would say nobody can forgive sins but God, and Jesus says, I know. I know that. But I'm going to forgive these sins. So, what does that say about me? He is not just a prophet. He has real authority from God to forgive all sins. And so she walks into the room weeping, sobbing, bearing all kinds of guilt, dragging this around with her everywhere she goes. She is a sinner, a preeminent sinner, especially wicked. And Jesus says, you are now forgiven. In the sermon a few weeks ago, back in February, I mentioned Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18, that says, though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. And though they are red as crimson, they shall be like wool. That's what Jesus does. No matter how big the stain, how deep the stain, how ugly the stain of sin is, it's scrubbed away and we become as white as snow. There's not a spot on us. That woman left purified, cleansed, and forgiven. I'm assuming she's going to go out in tears as well, but very different tears, not those hot burning tears of guilt and regret and sorrow, but happy tears, feeling that this awful burden has been forgiven. God honors humble hearts, which is one of the reasons that Jesus has a hard time with the Pharisees, because they really don't have humble hearts. They're very proud of their accomplishments. But this woman clearly has a humble heart. And because of that, God can and will work with her. God always stands opposed to people who are self-confident, arrogant, and proud. There's a passage from Proverbs chapter 3, Proverbs 3:34, that gets quoted in the New Testament by James and by Peter. Solomon writes in Proverbs 3 that God mocks proud mockers, but shows favor to the humble and oppressed. God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. And that's what we see Jesus doing in this meal. He is opposed to the proud Pharisees and isn't afraid to knock them down a little bit, and at the same time to lift this very broken, very humble woman up. Any comments about that? All right. Again, by the end of the meal, I'm going to assume that Simon is not the only person surprised by what Jesus has said and done. The guests, the other people at the meal, are surprised too. Who is this guy? He's forgiving sins. They have to be confronted with the identity and the authority of this man as well. Who is he? He's taking on a role that we believe only God can take. Is he a miracle worker? Is he a prophet? Is he a special teacher? Well, yeah, but he's a lot more. He's come from God. He brings healing. He brings forgiveness. And as Jesus sends this woman out, he also brings peace. He tells her that she should go in peace. That's not just like an equivalent of see you later or catch you next time or have a good night. It's not go in peace. I think there's some real meaning here that she really hasn't had peace up until this point. She's found peace for herself with Jesus. She has found peace with God. She's no longer going to struggle with her past, dragging around that burden of all of her sin and guilt and shame. She has found something very different when she came to the meal that night. It's a very compassionate story. It's good to see and to understand that when we come to Jesus, no matter what our past has been like, no matter what we're guilty of, that when we come to him humbly, we hardly even have to ask for it. He promises that he'll forgive. He washes all that stuff away, and we can have real peace with him and with God. Deep thoughts? I'm sure glad. Well, okay. We're going to be done a little early, earlier than normal this morning. The next time we get together, we'll be talking about 3 or 4 different passages that show how people understood, specifically those opponents of Jesus, how they understood that he had the power to do what he did. Where did his power come from? Was it only the enemy Pharisees that believed it? Who all thought that there was something not right about his very special abilities? So we'll be looking at that and maybe a little bit more when we get together next time. Okay. Is there anything you'd like for us to pray about this morning before we head out? Yes, Nat.
My grandfather passes away.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
Where is he?
He's in Texarkana.
So you could be able to go home? No?
I kind of said my goodbyes before I left. I've been here about a month, so I saw him about a month.
Okay.
I'd like to get over this dizziness.
Is your vision any better this morning?
Yeah, the vision's pretty good. But if I put my head down, then it's dizzy.
Okay. Okay.
Daughter's still having a real difficult pregnancy. Specialist appointment on Friday, they think she may be placenta previa.
Okay. Remind me of her name.
Hmm?
Can you remind me of your daughter's name?
Jennifer,
Jennifer. I thought that was right. Okay.
along with 50% of the females born that year.
Well, you can just about guess about what her age range is for her name. Anybody else? Well, I'm gonna turn off the camera. Thanks for being with us. We can always go back and check out some other things. Who knows, I may even fill in some of the missing blanks in our Life of Christ study.